An old, abandoned house, a loyal dog waiting by the door for years, and a rusted key hiding secrets of a shattered family. What led Max, the forgotten guardian, to stay behind? And what shocking truth did his devotion uncover? Stay with us. This story will touch your heart and make you believe in second chances. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. The rain drizzled softly over the small town of Brattleboro, Vermont, shrouding the streets in a muted grey. Nestled at the edge of town, an old house stood in quiet decay, a place the locals called Grayson's Folly. Time had stripped it of grandeur, leaving weather-beaten shutters and a sagging roof as its only legacy. It whispered of neglect, its hollow windows staring back at anyone bold enough to look too long. For years, the house was a canvas of speculation. Children dared one another to cross its creaking threshold, their laughter quickly swallowed by unease. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, spinning tales of ghosts or tragic losses. But no one ever stayed long enough to see if those stories held truth. Inside, however, someone, or rather something, remained. Max, a dog long past his prime, claimed the house as his own. His coat, once golden and rich, had dulled to a muted tan, now patched and rough from time and neglect. His legs trembled as he walked, each step careful, deliberate. Yet his eyes still held a spark of something profound, loyalty, longing, perhaps even hope. Every day Max limped to the door, his brittle nails clicking softly against the warped floorboards. He'd sit there, ears perked, as if listening for a sound only he could hear. The hours stretched endlessly, his frail frame slumped against the doorframe, waiting for someone who never came. On this particular morning, the house had a visitor. A group of children, emboldened by dares and curiosity, ventured to Grayson's Folly. They pushed the door ajar, the groan of rusted hinges echoing in the silent air. But their bravado melted away when they spotted Max. "Do you see that?" one of them whispered, pointing. "He's still alive?" another murmured, their tone tinged with both awe and pity. The children scattered as soon as they arrived, their giggles replaced by hurried footsteps and nervous glances. But their chatter reached the ears of someone who cared. Callie Marston was in her small clinic, adjusting a bandage on a spry tabby, when she overheard the children recount their tale to a friend. An old dog, they'd said, living in that creepy house on the hill. The description alone was enough to pull at her heart. Callie had a knack for animals, a gift she'd nurtured since childhood, and the idea of one left alone to fend for itself struck a chord too deep to ignore. By mid-afternoon, Callie found herself standing before Grayson's Folly. The sight of the house sent a shiver through her. Yet, as her boots crunched against the overgrown grass, her focus narrowed on the figure framed in the doorway. Maximum. "Hey there, buddy," she called softly, kneeling a few feet away. The old dog lifted his head, ears twitching at the sound of her voice. His eyes met hers, and for a moment they both seemed suspended in an unspoken understanding. Then, with a trembling effort, Max struggled to his feet. "You've been waiting a long time, haven't you?" Callie murmured, her voice breaking just slightly. Max didn't bark, he didn't growl. Instead, he leaned forward ever so slightly, as if her words held a promise he'd long been yearning to hear. Gently she reached out, her fingers brushing the matted fur around his neck. That's when she noticed it, a collar. Rusted and worn, it clung to his neck like a relic. Attached was a tag, nearly illegible from age, and a small key dangling beside it. "Where did you come from?" Callie wondered aloud, her curiosity sparking alongside her concern. She knew what she had to do. Scooping Max into her arms, she carried him carefully to her car. His body felt light, too light. yet he rested his head against her chest with a trust that nearly broke her heart. As she placed him gently into the passenger seat, her mind flashed to her childhood dog, Daisy. She remembered the warmth of Daisy's fur, the way her wagging tail could erase the heaviest of days. And she remembered the hollow ache when Daisy was gone, a loss that still lingered even now. The sound of tires on gravel jolted Callie back to the present. Amos Granger's truck pulled up, its engine rumbling like distant thunder. The gruff animal control officer stepped out, his gaze narrowing at the sight of Callie with Max. "You planning to take that dog?" Amos asked, his voice a mix of authority and skepticism. Callie straightened, her chin lifting defiantly. "He needs help, Amos. I can't leave him here." "Strays are unpredictable," he warned. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "I know enough," she replied, her voice steady, "and I won't let him die alone in that house." Amos sighed, shaking his head but saying nothing more. Callie climbed into her car, glancing one last time at Grayson's Folly as it faded in her rearview mirror. She felt an inexplicable pull, as though Max wasn't the only one who needed saving. Beside her, Max shifted slightly, his eyes closing but his breathing steady. The small key hanging from his collar glinted faintly in the late afternoon light, a silent clue to a story that had yet to unfold. As Callie drove toward the clinic, determination set in her jaw. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't let Max wait alone anymore. The soft hum of the clinic's fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow over the examination room as Callie gently placed Max on the metal table. The old dog let out a low sigh, his frail body shivering slightly, despite the warmth of the room. Callie ran her hand over his coarse fur, murmuring softly, "It's okay, Max. You're safe now." Dr. Emily Warren, a petite woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped into the room, snapping on a pair of gloves. She took one look at Max and shook her head. "Poor guy. He's been through the ringer, hasn't he?" "Years of neglect," Callie replied, her voice tight with emotion. "But there's something about him, Emily. I can't explain it." Emily worked quickly, her experienced hands moving over Max's body with care. Severe malnutrition, advanced arthritis in his hind legs, and these scars. She traced a long mark across Max's side, her brow furrowing. "They're old, but they tell a story. He's been through more than his share of hardship." Despite the prodding, Max stayed calm, his dark eyes fixed on Callie. Emily paused, her tone softening. "It's strange. Usually dogs in his condition are skittish or withdrawn, but look at him. He's completely tuned into you. It's like he knows you're here to help." Callie smiled faintly, feeling a flicker of warmth amid her worry. "He's special. I can feel it." After the exam, Callie carried Max to a padded crate in the corner of the room, her arms cradling him as if he might shatter. As she adjusted the blanket beneath him, her eyes fell on the brass key dangling from his collar. The tag was nearly unreadable, but she squinted, tracing the faint lettering. "Property of Alden Whitaker." "Emily!" she called, holding up the collar. "Do you recognize this name?" Emily glanced over but shook her head. "Can't say I do. Might be worth asking around. Brattleboro's got its fair share of old families. Whitaker could be one of them." Callie turned the key over in her hand, its weight grounding her in a swirl of questions. Who was Alden Whitaker? Why had Max been left alone in that house? And what could this key possibly unlock? She set it aside, deciding Max's recovery had to come first. The answers would wait. Later that afternoon, Callie met Silas Dunn at the abandoned house. With his flannel shirt and toolbox in hand, Silas was a familiar figure in the town, a handyman who seemed to know everyone and everything. He greeted Callie with his usual lopsided grin. "Back at it again, Callie," he teased. "Rescuing lost souls and strays?" She rolled her eyes, though a small smile tugged at her lips. "I need your help. The house is a mess, and I can't leave it like this. Max deserves better." Silas followed her inside, whistling low at the state of the place. "You're not kidding. This place could use more than a little elbow grease. But for you, consider it done." As they worked, Silas's chatter filled the quiet, lightening the heavy air. But even his humor couldn't erase the feeling that the house was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. By the time they stepped outside, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. Silas leaned against his truck, his expression softening. "You've got a big heart, Callie. Just don't get too caught up in the past. Sometimes it's better to let things lie." She nodded but didn't respond. Letting things lie had never been her strong suit. At the clinic, Amos Granger was waiting, his broad frame leaning against the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but the sharp edge in his tone was unmistakable. "You're taking a big risk, Callie. That dog's condition could be a danger to you and the town." Callie's jaw tightened. "Max isn't dangerous. He's just been through hell. He deserves a chance." Amos crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "Town policy is clear. Strays get reported, quarantined if necessary. You're bending the rules." "And I'll take responsibility," Callie shot back. "I'll prove he's not a threat." Amos stared at her for a long moment before sighing heavily. "Fine, but I'm watching. If anything goes wrong, it's on you." That night, Callie brought Max to her small apartment. She set up a cozy bed for him near the window, lining it with soft blankets. Max settled in slowly, his body curling into the makeshift nest. Yet, as the hours ticked by, Callie noticed Max's restlessness. He stared at the door, his ears twitching at every creak of the building. When the distant sound of a train whistle echoed through the night, he whined softly, a mournful sound that tugged at her heart. Unable to leave him, Callie lay down beside him, her hand resting gently on his back. "Who were you waiting for, Max?" she whispered. In the quiet, her own memories crept in. She thought of Daisy, her childhood companion, the one constant in her life during a turbulent time. Losing Daisy had felt like losing a piece of herself, a wound that never fully healed. "You remind me of her," Callie murmured, her voice breaking. "That same loyalty, that same heart." Max stirred in his sleep, his head nudging against her hand as though to comfort her. In the early hours of the morning, a soft sound roused Callie. She opened her eyes to find Max standing near the table, his nose nudging the brass key she'd left there. He pushed it gently toward her, his gaze unwavering. "You want me to find something, don't you?" Callie asked, sitting up. Max's tail wagged faintly, a ghost of motion, but enough to send a shiver down her spine. She picked up the key, turning it over in her hands once more. The weight of it felt heavier now, as if it carried not just metal, but a story begging to be told. Callie glanced at Max, who had returned to his spot by the door, his eyes half closed but still watchful. "I'll find out," she promised softly. "I'll find out who left you behind, and why." Max's head rested on her lap, his warm breath steady against her arm. In that moment, Callie felt the smallest flicker of hope. Hope that this journey, however uncertain, might lead to answers worth finding. The morning sun crept over Brattleboro, casting a pale light on the weary town. Callie glanced at Max as she secured his harness. His frail body trembled slightly, but his tail wagged faintly, and there was a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. "We're going back," she murmured. "Let's see what you've been holding on to all this time." Silas met her at the edge of Grayson's Folly, his truck rumbling to a stop on the uneven gravel. He hopped out, toolbox in hand, giving Max an affectionate pat on the head. "Morning, buddy," he said softly, before turning to Callie. "Still sure about this? That place gives me the creeps." Callie nodded, determination flickering in her gaze. "Max knows something, Silas. I can feel it. We owe it to him to figure this out." As they approached the house, Max's energy shifted. His ears perked, and he let out a soft bark, a sound that seemed to echo with recognition. He moved with purpose, his steps steadier than before, leading them to the front door like a sentinel returning to his post. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and memories. Silas muttered something about the smell as Callie took in the sight of the once elegant home. Beneath the decay, traces of grandeur lingered, intricate crown moulding now cracked and peeling, a grand staircase whose banister had been polished by years of use, and faded wallpaper that whispered of better days. Max moved purposefully, sniffing at the corners, his tail wagging faintly as he explored. Callie followed, her eyes catching on small details that painted a picture of sudden departure. A toppled chair lay near the fireplace. Family photographs, their edges curling with age, sat scattered on a side table. A patchwork quilt, frayed but lovingly stitched, was draped over a dusty armchair. "Someone left in a hurry," Callie remarked, running her fingers over a photograph of a young girl holding a puppy. Her breath caught. "Silas, look at this. That's Max." The puppy in the photo had the same soulful eyes and golden fur, though years had aged him beyond recognition. Standing beside him was a man, broad-shouldered, his face lined with both strength and sadness. "Who's the woman and girl?" Silas asked, leaning over her shoulder. Callie shook her head. "I don't know, but we need to find out." Max barked again, this time leading them to the staircase. He sniffed at a corner near the bottom step, pawing gently at the wood. Callie knelt down, her fingers tracing the edges of a hidden compartment. With Silas's help, she pried it open, revealing a small wooden box. The brass key from Max's collar fit perfectly into the lock. Callie turned it slowly, the latch clicking open with a soft thud. Inside, she found letters tied with a ribbon, faded photographs, and a worn leather journal. Callie thumbed through the pages of the journal, her heart tightening as she read the scrawled words. Alden Whitaker, the man in the photograph, had poured his grief into its pages, recounting the loss of his wife and daughter in a car accident. The words painted a portrait of a man consumed by guilt, retreating from the world and leaving behind everything he once held dear. "It's heartbreaking," Callie whispered. "He blamed himself. That's why he disappeared." Max whimpered softly, his muzzle resting on Callie's knee, as though he too carried the weight of the words. Silas, meanwhile, explored the living room, where he discovered a loose floorboard. Underneath was a small metal box containing legal papers and a deed. "Callie," Silas called, handing her the documents. "Looks like he had another place. York, Maine." Callie scanned the papers, her mind racing. That must be where he went. We need to go there. Before she could elaborate, the sound of boots on gravel made them both freeze. Amos Granger appeared in the doorway, his expression stern. "Do I even need to ask what you're doing here?" Amos said, his voice low. "This is private property, Callie. You're crossing a line." "It's abandoned," she countered, stepping forward. "No one's been here in years. And Max, he's trying to tell us something. I'm not leaving until I figure out what." Amos frowned, his gaze flicking to Max, who stared back with unyielding determination. For a moment, his expression softened, but he quickly masked it with a sigh. "Just be careful," Amos muttered, stepping aside, "and don't make me regret giving you the benefit of the doubt." That evening, Callie settled Max into his bed, her mind spinning with the day's discoveries. But as night fell, worry crept in. Max seemed tired, his breath shallow, his body curling tightly as though seeking comfort from unseen wounds. "You're not giving up on me now, are you?" Callie whispered, stroking his fur. Max opened his eyes briefly, his gaze meeting hers with a quiet resolve. As she sat beside him, the brass key resting in her palm, Callie made a silent promise. She would find Alden Whitaker, no matter how far she had to go. The sun rose over Brattleboro, casting long shadows on the frost-kissed fields as Callie loaded the last of her things into Silas's truck. Max was already in the back seat, his frail frame curled up on a blanket, his eyes half closed but watchful. Callie glanced at him with a mixture of determination and concern. "You sure about this?" Silas asked, tightening a strap on the gear in the truck bed. "Maine's a long way, and Max doesn't look like he's up for much." Callie nodded, her resolve unshaken. "I'm not giving up now. Max brought us this far. There's something waiting for us in York. I can feel it." The drive started quietly, the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the tires on the road a soothing backdrop to the changing scenery. Vermont's rolling hills gave way to the rugged peaks of New Hampshire, the colors of late autumn painting the landscape in rich hues of amber and crimson. But Callie's mind wasn't on the scenery. Her eyes flicked to Max often, her heart sinking at how small he looked curled up on the blanket. Every shallow rise and fall of his chest was a reminder of the time slipping away. Silas, sensing her worry, broke the silence. "You know," he said, keeping his eyes on the road, "my dad used to take me on drives like this. He'd say the best way to clear your head was to hit the open road." Callie turned to him, curious despite her preoccupation. "I didn't know you were close to your dad." Silas chuckled, though there was a hint of sadness in it. "We were, until we weren't. Things fell apart after my mom passed." He retreated into himself, much like this Alden guy. Guess grief does that to people. The weight of his words settled between them, unspoken but understood. Silas's admission felt like a thread connecting the fragments of their journey. Alden's abandonment, Max's loyalty, and Callie's own struggles with loss. By the time they crossed into Maine, Max stirred for the first time in hours. He sat up, his nose twitching, and let out a soft, eager bark. Callie turned to him, startled. "What is it, boy?" she asked, her voice soft but hopeful. Max's tail thumped weakly against the seat as he leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. As they passed through York's quaint streets, his excitement grew, soft barks turning into a rhythmic tapping of his paw against the seat. "He knows this place," Callie whispered, her hope swelling. They stopped at a small diner near the edge of town, its windows fogged up from the warmth inside. An elderly waitress greeted them, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun. Her name tag read, Eleanor. Eleanor's eyes softened as she noticed Max. "Well, aren't you a handsome old fella?" she cooed, then looked at Callie. "What brings you folks to York?" Callie hesitated before pulling the photograph of Alden and Max from her pocket. "I'm looking for this man. His name's Alden Whitaker. Do you know him?" Eleanor squinted at the photograph, then nodded slowly. "Alden used to come around here. Quiet man, always had his dog with him. That your boy there?" "Yes," Callie said quickly. "Do you know where we might find him?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "He stopped coming to town a couple of years ago, but he talked about a cabin he had out in the woods. Said it was his sanctuary." She paused, glancing at Max. "If he's still alive, that's where you'll find him." The mention of Alden's reclusion sparked unease among a few patrons who overheard the conversation. One man leaned over, his tone gruff. "Leave it be, lady. Alden doesn't want visitors. Let the man live in peace." Callie bristled but chose to ignore him. "Thank you, Eleanor," she said, her resolve only deepening. Following Eleanor's directions, Callie and Silas set out toward the wooded outskirts of town. The path grew rugged, forcing them to park and continue on foot. Max, despite his frailty, seemed energized, pulling ahead with surprising determination. "Easy, Max," Callie murmured, struggling to keep up. "We'll get there." The cabin appeared almost suddenly, hidden among a cluster of trees. Its weathered exterior blended seamlessly with the forest, but the faint smoke curling from the chimney told them someone was inside. Max barked sharply, rushing to the door and scratching at it with renewed vigor. Callie's heart raced as she knocked hesitantly. "Mr. Whitaker," she called, her voice trembling. There was no answer, but the door creaked open slightly. Callie pushed it further, revealing a dimly lit room. Alden Whitaker sat in a worn armchair, his frame gaunt, his face shadowed by an unkempt beard. The walls around him were lined with photographs and mementos, each one a fragment of the life he'd left behind. "Who are you?" Alden's voice was hoarse, edged with suspicion. "My name's Callie Marston," she began cautiously. I think you know this dog." Max limped forward, his tail wagging as he reached Alden's chair. He rested his head on Alden's lap, letting out a soft whine. The sight broke something in the older man, his shoulders sagging as his hand hesitantly stroked Max's fur. "I thought he was gone," Alden murmured, his voice cracking. "I thought he wouldn't come back." Callie stepped closer, her tone gentle but firm. "He's been waiting for you, Mr. Whitaker, for years. Max never gave up on you." Alden's eyes glistened with tears as he looked at the dog, his fingers trembling. "I left because I didn't deserve him, or anything else. After I lost them..." He choked on his words, gesturing to a photograph of a woman and a young girl. "I didn't know how to stay." Callie crouched beside him, her voice steady. "Max doesn't care about your past. He cares about you, and right now he needs you. Please, don't turn away from him again." Alden closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing on him. After a long silence, he nodded. "I'll help him. But after that, you leave." "I can't." He stopped, his voice faltering. "I just can't." The chapter ended with Alden holding an old photograph, his wife, his daughter, and a younger Max by his side. The image trembled in his grasp, a silent reminder of the love he'd abandoned, but never truly lost. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackling of the fire. Max lay on a makeshift bed of blankets near Alden's chair, his breathing shallow and uneven. Callie crouched beside him, her fingers lightly grazing his fur. A growing knot of dread tightened in her chest. Suddenly, Max stirred, his body tensing as a shudder ran through him. His head drooped onto the blanket, and a faint whimper escaped his lips. "Alden!" Callie called, panic thick in her voice. "Something's wrong. He needs help, now!" Alden looked stricken, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the armrests of his chair. His eyes darted to Max, then to Callie. For a moment he froze, paralyzed by indecision. "Please," Callie urged, her tone softer but no less urgent. "If you care about him, we have to go. He's holding on, but he needs more than we can give him here." Silas stepped forward, his voice firm but not unkind. "You heard her, Alden. Max needs a vet. Let's move." Alden hesitated, his hand hovering over Max's head. Then, with a reluctant nod, he stood and grabbed his coat. "Let's go," he said quietly. The drive to the clinic was tense. The silence inside the truck was broken only by the hum of the engine and Max's labored breathing. Callie cradled him in her lap, whispering words of reassurance even as her heart raced with worry. Alden, seated in the passenger seat, stared out the window, his face shadowed with guilt. After several miles, he finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "It's my fault," he began, his eyes fixed on the passing trees. "The accident. the one that took my wife and daughter. It was my fault." Callie glanced at him, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Alden's hands clenched into fists. "I was driving that day. We were on our way to visit her parents. The roads were slick and I wasn't paying attention. I was arguing with my wife about something trivial. Before I knew it, we hit black ice." His voice broke and he took a shaky breath. "They didn't make it. Max was my daughter's dog, the only thing that survived that day besides me. But looking at him, it was a reminder of what I lost, of what I failed to protect." Callie's grip on Max tightened, her heart aching at Alden's confession. "But Max never gave up on you," she said gently. "He didn't see your guilt, only your love. That's why he stayed loyal." Alden didn't respond, but his gaze softened as he looked at Max. The clinic in York was modest but well equipped. Dr. Susan Hayward, a kind woman with sharp eyes and a steady demeanor, greeted them at the door. "Let's get him inside," she said briskly, leading them to an examination room. Callie hovered anxiously as Dr. Hayward examined Max. The vet's expression was serious, but not without hope. "He's malnourished and severely dehydrated, and his arthritis has been aggravated by years of neglect. But his vitals are stronger than I expected, considering his condition." "Can he make it?" Callie asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Hayward nodded, her tone firm. "With rest, proper care, and someone he trusts by his side, he has a good chance. But he'll need stability and love." Alden's head dipped, his shoulders slumping. He moved to Max's side and knelt, placing a trembling hand on the dog's back. "I'll stay," he murmured. "I won't leave him again." As they waited for Max to be stabilized, Callie sat in the clinic's small lounge, her thoughts racing. She absently reached for Max's blanket, intending to fold it, when her fingers brushed against something crumpled inside. It was a letter, worn and smudged. Callie unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the faded handwriting. Her breath caught as she read, "Dear Daddy, thank you for letting me keep Max. I know you didn't want a dog at first, but now I can see how much you love him. He makes our family whole. If something ever happens, promise me you'll take care of him. Max is a reminder of all the love we share. Love, Lila." Tears blurred Callie's vision as she finished reading. She turned to Alden, who sat silently in the corner, his hands clasped tightly. Without a word, she crossed the room and placed the letter in his hands. "You need to read this," she said softly. Alden unfolded the letter, his expression hardening at first. But as he read, the walls around his heart began to crumble. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "She trusted me. And I failed her." Callie knelt beside him, her voice steady. "You haven't failed her, Alden. Max is still here. He's waiting for you to honor that promise." Alden didn't respond, but his grip on the letter tightened. The next few days brought small but significant changes. Under Dr. Hayward's care and Alden's unwavering presence, Max began to recover. His appetite returned, and his eyes regained some of their former brightness. Alden, too, began to change. He cleaned the cabin, restoring it to a semblance of its former warmth. He shared stories of Lila and his wife, their laughter filling the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. One evening, as the fire crackled softly, Alden turned to Callie. "There's one more thing," he said hesitantly. "Back at the house in Brattleboro, there's a memory box. I couldn't bring myself to take it when I left, but now I think it's time." Callie nodded, her expression resolute. "We'll go together, whenever you're ready." Before Alden could respond, Callie's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her heart sinking at the sight of Amos Granger's name. "Callie," Amos said, his tone gruff but concerned. I've got some bad news. Someone reported seeing Max. The town's questioning whether he should be seized as an unlicensed stray. Callie's hand tightened around the phone, her mind racing. They can't take him, Amos. He's Alden's dog. I'm trying to buy you time, Amos replied, but you'd better act fast. Callie ended the call, her jaw set. She turned to Alden, her determination shining through. We're not letting them take him, but we'll need to fight this, together. The drive back to Brattleboro was heavy with unspoken emotions. The closer they got to the abandoned house, the more Alden seemed to shrink into himself. His hands gripped the frayed edges of his coat, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery. Max rested in the back seat, his head on Callie's lap, his breath slow but steady. "You okay back there?" Silas asked, his voice unusually gentle. Callie glanced up from stroking Max's fur. "We're holding on," she replied, her tone calm but edged with concern. Alden, seated in the passenger seat, let out a deep sigh. "I never thought I'd see that house again," he murmured. "Every corner, every sound, it's filled with ghosts." Callie reached over, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You're not facing them alone," she said softly. "We're with you, and so is Max." As they pulled into the driveway, the house loomed before them, its weathered exterior a stark reminder of abandonment. Max stirred, lifting his head and letting out a faint bark. His tail thumped against the seat as if in recognition. But before they could step out, another vehicle pulled up behind them. Amos Granger emerged, his uniform stiff and his expression unreadable. A local enforcement officer followed, clipboard in hand. "Alden," Amos began, his voice carrying authority. "I understand you've come back, but we need to talk about Max. There's a report against you. Neglect. Abandonment." Alden froze, his face pale. "I'm trying to make it right," he said, his voice trembling. "I never meant—" "You left him," Amos cut in, though not harshly. "And that's what the law sees." Callie stepped forward, her tone firm but not confrontational. "Max survived because he's loyal, not because Alden didn't care. He's here now, doing everything he can to fix what was broken." The officer scribbled something on his clipboard. "Abandonment is serious, Ma'am," he interjected. "If Max's health is at risk—" "Look at him," Callie interrupted, gesturing to the old dog now standing beside Alden. "He's been through hell, yes, but Alden's care is what's helping him heal. Max hasn't given up on Alden, and you shouldn't either." Alden, his voice shaking, took a step closer. "I lost everything," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the ground. "My wife, my daughter. It felt like the world was telling me I didn't deserve anything good. I left because I thought it was the right thing, to let Max have a better chance without me." He looked down at Max, who nuzzled his leg. "But he waited. For years he waited. He's better than I deserve, but I swear to you, I'll never leave him again." Max, as if understanding, hobbled forward, resting his head against Alden's hand. The officer hesitated, his pen hovering over the clipboard. Even Amos's stern demeanor softened as he watched the display. "All right," Amos said finally, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I'll give you a probationary period. Prove you can take care of him. But know this, if I see any sign that Max isn't getting what he needs, I'll step in." Alden nodded, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Thank you." Inside the house, the air was thick with dust and memories. Alden moved cautiously, his steps faltering as he passed familiar spaces. Max, despite his weariness, seemed energized, leading them through the dim rooms. In what had been Lila's bedroom, Alden stopped. He knelt by the floorboards, his hands trembling as he pried one loose. Beneath it was a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by time. Callie crouched beside him as he opened it. Inside were photographs, letters, and a tiny collar. a puppy collar that once belonged to Max. Alden picked it up, his fingers tracing the faded stitching of Lila's name. "She insisted on putting her name on it," Alden said, his voice thick. "Said Max was her best friend, and everyone should know it." Callie smiled through her tears. "She sounds like she loved him with all her heart." "She did," Alden whispered, his shoulders shaking. "And so did I." As they prepared to leave, the sky darkened ominously. A storm rolled in, the wind howling through the broken windows and loose shingles. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark relief. "We can't drive in this," Silas said, peering outside. "Looks like we're stuck here for the night." They huddled in the living room, the firelight casting long shadows on the walls. Alden sat with the memory box in his lap, recounting stories of his family's life in this house. Silas, uncharacteristically quiet, eventually shared how he'd grown distant from his own father, a rift he now regretted. "You don't get time back," Silas said, his voice low. "Whatever you've got left, you'd better make it count." As the storm raged on, a shutter banged open, sending a gust of wind through the room. Callie moved to close it, but stopped short. Behind the shutter was a hidden compartment, its edges barely visible in the dim light. Inside, she found a framed photograph of Alden's family. On the back, in a delicate hand, were the words, "Find me where it began." Callie turned to Alden, who stared at the photo in stunned silence. "What does it mean?" she asked. Alden's face darkened with a mix of sorrow and determination. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think it's time we found out." The night in the abandoned house had left a lingering unease in the air. The photograph's message, "Find me where it began," hung heavily between the group as they prepared to leave Brattleboro. Alden held the photograph tightly, his knuckles pale against the frame. "Bennington," he murmured, breaking the silence. "It has to mean the farmhouse. That's where it all started for us." Callie leaned forward, her curiosity mingled with concern. "Your first home?" Alden nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "My wife and I moved there right after we were married. She planted a rose bush in the garden, said it was for new beginnings." Max, curled at Callie's feet, let out a faint whine. His once bright eyes seemed dimmer, his breaths heavier. Callie's heart ached as she knelt to stroke his fur. "We'll find it, Max," she promised. "We'll find what it means." The drive to Bennington was tense, the quiet punctuated only by the hum of the engine and the occasional bark from Max. Silas, sensing the weight of the moment, broke the silence with a story about his own family. "My dad and we didn't get along," he began, his hands gripping the wheel. "Stubborn old man thought I'd never amount to much. We didn't talk for years, not until he got sick. By then, it was too late to fix things properly." Alden glanced at him, his expression softening. "And yet you tried. That's more than I've done." Silas shook his head. "You're here now, Alden. You're trying to make things right. That counts for something." The farmhouse came into view, shrouded in overgrown foliage and the decay of neglect. The sight stole the breath from Alden's chest, memories flooding back in vivid detail, the laughter of his daughter running through the garden, his wife humming as she tended to the roses. All of it was here, frozen in time. Max perked up as they stepped out of the car, his energy surprising despite his frailty. He barked once, then twice, before trotting determinedly toward the back of the house. Callie and Silas exchanged glances, following the old dog through the tangled weeds. Behind the house lay the remnants of a once-tended garden. The rosebush, though wild and unkempt, still bloomed defiantly against the passage of time. Max stopped before it, pawing gently at the earth. Alden dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he dug into the soil. The metallic edge of a rusted lockbox emerged, its surface speckled with years of dirt and grime. Callie handed him the brass key, her own breath caught in her throat. The lock clicked open, revealing the treasures within. A stack of drawings, their crayon colors faded but vibrant with love. A pressed rose, fragile yet intact, and a neatly folded letter addressed simply to Alden. Alden unfolded the letter with care, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. His wife's voice seemed to echo in the words, soft and comforting. "My dearest Alden," it began. "If you're reading this, then you've found your way back. I hope you remember this garden, not for its roses, but for what it stood for. New beginnings, my love. Always new beginnings." The letter spoke of her enduring love, her hopes for their family, and her trust in Alden to carry on no matter what hardships lay ahead. Her final lines brought tears to Alden's eyes. "Max is our guardian. Trust him, as I always have. He will guide you back to love." Callie placed a hand on his shoulder as Alden's tears fell freely, his body shaking with the weight of his grief and the beginnings of release. As the sun began to set, they prepared to leave, their mission seemingly complete. But as they rounded the house, a figure stepped into their path. "Who's trespassing on my land?" the man barked, his rugged frame blocking their way. "This property belongs to me now." Callie stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We're only here to retrieve something personal. We didn't mean any harm." The man, Hank Millard by his introduction, crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "Doesn't matter, you've got no business here." Before Callie could argue further, Max, weak but resolute, stepped between them. The old dog barked with surprising strength, his stance protective. Hank faltered, his tough demeanor cracking under Max's unyielding gaze. "All right," Hank grumbled, stepping aside. "Just finish up and go." As they drove away, the tension gave way to a quiet sense of triumph. Alden held the lockbox close, its contents a reminder of what he had lost and what he still had to honor. Back in the car, Callie noticed a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the drawings. She opened it carefully, revealing a hand-drawn map with an X marked near the farmhouse. "What's this?" she asked, passing it to Alden. He studied the map, his brow furrowing. "It's something I'd forgotten, something I think we need to find." The car grew silent again, the possibilities hanging in the air as they sped down the darkening road. The map lay spread across the table in Callie's small apartment, its lines faint but unmistakable. The X was marked deep in the Green Mountain National Forest. Silence filled the room as Alden traced the path with his finger, his expression distant. "It's where we used to camp," he said, his voice trembling with the weight of memory. "My wife, my daughter, and I. It was our place, quiet, untouched, and ours alone." Silas leaned back in his chair, tapping the map. "Looks like a tough trek, but we've come this far. What do you think, Callie?" Callie glanced at Max, who lay curled on a blanket nearby. Though his body was frail, his eyes sparkled with a determination that mirrored Alden's. "We'll go," she said softly. "Max wouldn't want us to stop now." The journey into the Green Mountain National Forest was not for the faint of heart. The trails were rugged, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. Silas led the way, machete in hand, clearing the path with practiced ease. "Remind me why we're doing this again?" he joked, wiping sweat from his brow. "I could be sipping coffee in town right now." "Because it matters," Callie said, smiling despite herself. "And because you love a good adventure." Alden trudged behind them, Max by his side. Every few steps the old dog would pause, sniffing the air as though reacquainting himself with a long-forgotten place. Despite his frailty, Max pressed on, his loyalty unwavering. Hours later, the group stumbled into a secluded clearing. The air was still, the sunlight filtering through the trees casting a golden glow over the scene. An old fire pit sat in the center, flanked by a weathered wooden bench. Alden froze. "This is it," he whispered, his voice cracking. "This is where we used to sit, where Emily would sing and Clara would dance around the fire." Max barked softly, drawing their attention to a spot near the fire pit. He began pawing at the ground, his determination contagious. Callie and Silas joined him, digging into the earth until the edge of a metal container emerged. The time capsule was caked in dirt, its lid rusted but intact. Alden knelt beside it, his hands trembling as he opened it. Inside were the treasures of a simpler time, a small toy horse, its paint chipped but bright, a photograph of Alden's family, their smiles radiant with love, and a folded piece of paper. "It's a letter," Alden said, his voice barely audible. He unfolded the paper, revealing his daughter's neat, childish handwriting. "Daddy," it began, "this is for you to find someday. Don't forget how much we love you. You're our hero no matter what. Love." Clara tears streamed down Alden's face as he clutched the letter to his chest. "She believed in me," he murmured, "even when I didn't." Max lay down beside Alden, his head resting on his lap. Callie crouched next to them, her voice gentle. "Max has been carrying this for you all along. He's not just your dog, Alden. He's your family's guardian." Silas nodded, his usual humor replaced by quiet reverence. "You've got some loyal companions here, Alden. Might be time to start trusting them." The moment of peace was short-lived. Max's body trembled, and he let out a low whine before collapsing onto the ground. Panic surged through Callie as she checked his pulse, her heart pounding. "He's exhausted," she said. "We need to let him rest." They set up camp in the clearing, building a fire to ward off the evening chill. Alden stayed by Max's side, stroking his fur and murmuring words of comfort. Night fell, the forest alive with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. As the fire crackled, a figure emerged from the shadows, startling the group. It was Amos Granger. "What in the world are you doing out here?" he demanded, his flashlight casting sharp beams across the camp. "You're pushing that dog too hard." Callie stood, her voice steady but firm. "We're not here to hurt Max. We're here to help Alden find closure." Amos's gaze shifted to Alden, who sat by the fire, clutching the time capsule. For the first time, Amos's stern demeanor softened. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Alden nodded. "But I'm trying to make it right. For Max. For my family." Amos sighed, lowering his flashlight. "Just don't push the dog too far. He deserves peace as much as you do." In the quiet of the night, Max stirred. He barked faintly, his nose pointing toward the edge of the clearing. Alden followed him, his heart pounding as Max led him to a wooden marker hidden beneath the brush. Carved into the wood were the initials EW and CW, alongside the words "Always Together." Alden fell to his knees, his grief mingled with a bittersweet joy. His wife and daughter had left this marker for him, a message of love and a reminder that their memories would always be with him. As Alden cradled Max in his arms, he whispered, "Thank you, old friend. You brought me back to them." The morning broke softly over the forest, its golden light spilling through the dense canopy. Alden sat quietly by the smoldering remnants of last night's campfire. Max curled at his feet. The old dog's breaths were slow, deliberate, each one a testament to his enduring spirit. Alden reached down, stroking Max's head, his touch filled with gratitude and sadness. "You've done more than anyone could ask," Alden whispered. "But we're not done yet, old boy." The group stirred to life around the campfire, the air heavy with the weight of the previous night's discoveries. Silas busied himself boiling water for coffee, while Callie carefully checked Max's condition. Even Amos, usually brusque and impatient, had taken on a quieter demeanor. Over breakfast, Alden began to share the memories that had flooded back in waves since they arrived at the clearing. He spoke of his wife Emily's gentle wisdom, his daughter Clara's boundless energy, and the joy they had shared on their family camping trips. His voice trembled as he recounted how those moments, once vivid, had faded into the haze of his grief. To everyone's surprise, Amos joined in. He revealed that he had lost a younger sister years ago, someone he had pushed away in his stubbornness. "I thought I'd have more time," he admitted, his voice gruff but tinged with regret. "Turns out you don't always get the second chances you expect." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence that followed. For a moment, the group was united by their shared understanding of loss and the fragile beauty of second chances. As the group prepared to leave, Alden lingered at the wooden marker they had found. He knelt, placing Clara's small toy horse from the time capsule at its base. "It's for you, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice carrying into the stillness. "I'll carry you with me, always." Max watched from nearby, his gaze steady and full of trust, as if he understood the weight of Alden's gesture. The descent from the clearing was slow and arduous. Overnight rain had transformed the trails into muddy, treacherous paths. Silas, ever the practical guide, took the lead, cutting through thick underbrush and warning the group of slick rocks. "Watch your step, Callie," he called out, steadying her as she slipped on a moss-covered stone. Despite his weakened state, Max refused to be carried. At one point, when the trail forked unexpectedly, he barked and nudged Alden toward the correct path. His determination was a source of awe, even for Amos, who muttered under his breath, "That dog's got more heart than most people I know." As they neared the edge of the forest, the group was startled by voices calling out their names. A team of search and rescue volunteers emerged from the trees, led by none other than Eleanor Graves. "You lot had us worried," Eleanor exclaimed, her relief evident. She knelt beside Max, her hands gentle as she examined him. "This old fellow deserves a medal." Eleanor had brought medical supplies, which Callie gratefully used to stabilize Max for the final stretch of their journey. The group's spirits lifted as they realized they weren't alone in their mission. Back in York, Alden faced what he feared most: the judgment of the townsfolk. But as he walked into Dr. Hayward's clinic with Max in his arms, he was met not with scorn, but with compassion. The waiting room was filled with familiar faces, locals who had heard about Max's journey and Alden's efforts to make amends. "Let us know how we can help," one woman said, her eyes kind. Another placed a small donation jar on the counter, already half filled with crumpled bills and coins. As Alden sat beside Max during his examination, he felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through him. These people, once strangers, were rallying around him and Max. For the first time in years, Alden felt a flicker of belonging. That evening, as the group gathered at Callie's apartment, Alden sifted through the items from the time capsule. Among them, he found a sealed envelope addressed to him. His hands shook as he opened it, revealing a note written in Emily's elegant handwriting. "My dearest Alden," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back to us. Please remember, love doesn't die. It transforms. Build bridges, not walls. You've always had the strength to carry on, even when you didn't believe it yourself. Let Max guide you. Let love guide you. Always yours, Emily." Alden sat in stunned silence, the letter trembling in his hands. The room was quiet, the weight of Emily's words settling over them all. Callie placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. Alden looked at Max, who rested with his head on Alden's lap. "I'll honor her words," he said, his voice steady. "I'll make things right, with Max, with myself, and with this town." As the night deepened, Alden's resolve grew. For the first time in years, he felt ready to rebuild not just his life, but the bridges he had once burned. The morning sun filtered softly through the clinic windows, casting a golden light over the room where Max rested. Alden sat beside him, his hand gently stroking Max's graying fur. The old dog's chest rose and fell in slow, steady breaths, each one a fragile yet defiant testament to his enduring spirit. Alden leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've done more for me than I ever deserved, Max," he said. "But we're not done yet. Not just yet." Dr. Hayward entered with Callie and Silas, a small smile softening her otherwise serious demeanor. "He's a fighter, that's for sure," she said, checking Max's vitals. "He's responding well, but he'll need plenty of rest and love." Alden nodded, his resolve unwavering. "He'll get both, I promise you that." Silas clapped Alden on the back. "You're doing good, Alden, real good." Later that day, Eleanor Graves arrived at the clinic with news. She had arranged a town gathering, urging Alden to address the community. "They need to hear your story, Alden," Eleanor said gently, "and you need to tell it for yourself as much as for Max." At first hesitant, Alden ultimately agreed. That evening, he stood before a modest crowd in the town square, his voice trembling but honest. "I've made mistakes," Alden began, his eyes scanning the faces before him. "I let my grief consume me, and in doing so, I failed the one soul who never gave up on me, Max. He stayed loyal, even when I didn't deserve it. And now it's my turn to be loyal to him." The crowd listened intently, their expressions softening with each word. When Alden finished, the square erupted in applause. Strangers approached him with words of encouragement, offering their support and sharing their own stories of love and loss. Back at the clinic, Max began showing small but significant signs of recovery. He wagged his tail weakly at the sight of Alden, ate his meals with newfound enthusiasm, and even managed to nuzzle Callie's hand. Each improvement brought tears to Alden's eyes, filling him with a cautious yet growing hope. A week later, Alden led a small group to the clearing in the forest. Callie, Silas, Amos, and Eleanor joined him for a quiet memorial by the wooden marker. As they stood in a circle, Alden shared the letter from his wife, reading her words aloud. "Build bridges, not walls," Alden said, his voice breaking. "She believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself." The group stood in reflective silence, each person moved by the profound weight of Emily's message. Max lay at Alden's feet, his presence a silent testament to the love that had endured through every hardship. Inspired by Emily's words, Alden made a decision. "I'm going to turn the farmhouse into a shelter," he announced to the group. "A place where animals like Max can find love, care, and a second chance." Callie's face lit up. "I'll help you run it," she said without hesitation. "And I'll make sure the place is sturdy enough to last another 100 years, Silas added with a grin. Even Amos, with his usual gruffness, nodded. "You'll need someone to deal with the town permits," he said. "Count me in." The farmhouse shelter became a labor of love, bringing the town together in a way Alden hadn't anticipated. Volunteers flocked to help, bringing supplies, donations, and stories of their own pets. The sense of community renewed Alden's faith in humanity, reminding him that connections could heal even the deepest wounds. One peaceful morning, Alden awoke to find Max resting peacefully beside him, his breathing still and serene. Alden sat beside him for hours, tears streaming silently down his face. Max had given him everything, his love, his loyalty, and, most importantly, a reason to keep living. The community honored Max with a plaque at the shelter, inscribed with the words, "A guardian of love and loyalty." At the dedication ceremony, Alden spoke with quiet strength. "Max taught me that love doesn't give up. It endures, even when we think we're not worthy of it. He saved me. In every way, a soul can be saved." The crowd listened, many wiping away tears. Silas stood nearby, his usual stoic expression softened, while Callie smiled through her own emotions. The shelter's grand opening was a resounding success. Families arrived with pets in need, eager to support Alden's vision. As Alden greeted each visitor, he felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known in years. The farmhouse, once a place of sorrow, had become a beacon of hope. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alden sat on the farmhouse porch with a new rescue dog curled at his feet. The young dog, a playful mix of breeds, nuzzled his hand, drawing a small smile from Alden. He looked out at the fields stretching before him, the golden light painting the landscape in warmth. For the first time in years, Alden felt truly at peace. "Thank you, Max," he whispered, his voice carried away by the gentle breeze. The morning sun bathed the shelter in a soft golden glow, its rays glinting off the vibrant garden that now framed the once derelict farmhouse. Alden sat quietly on the porch, his hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, watching the lively scene before him. Children laughed as they tossed a ball for an excitable young dog, while volunteers guided visitors through the adoption process. The shelter, now a hub of hope and second chances, bustled with life. Alden smiled softly, the lines on his face etched with both sorrow and newfound peace. His thoughts drifted to Max, the loyal companion who had brought him to this moment. Without Max, none of this would exist. The laughter, the joy, the purpose he had reclaimed. Inside the shelter, a small corner dedicated to Max drew quiet attention. A glass case displayed Max's worn collar and the brass key that had started it all, alongside a photograph of him in his prime. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In loving memory of Max, a true guardian." Visitors left tokens of gratitude, flowers, handwritten notes, and even dog toys, as if Max could somehow feel their appreciation. It was a testament to how deeply his story had resonated, touching lives far beyond Alden's small town. One afternoon, a young family entered the shelter, their eyes lighting up as they spotted an older dog resting in a sunbeam near the window. Alden approached them with a welcoming smile. "His name is Rusty," he said gently. "He's been here a while, waiting for the right family." The family hesitated, but Alden knelt beside Rusty, stroking his fur with care. "You know, Max was just like him. Older, a little worn, but full of love to give. He taught me that it's never too late for a fresh start." The mother looked at her children, who were already petting Rusty with eager hands. "We'll take him," she said, her voice resolute. As they completed the adoption paperwork, Alden felt a surge of pride. Rusty's second chance mirrored his own, a powerful reminder of what Max had inspired. Callie and Silas had also found new paths shaped by their journey with Max. Callie had launched a local advocacy group promoting senior animal adoptions, her passion igniting a movement that spread throughout the region. Silas, after years of estrangement, had reconnected with his family. He often credited Alden's courage as the push he needed to face his own demons. "Max did more for us than we'll ever fully understand," Silas admitted one evening as they shared a drink on the porch. "He brought us back to life in his own way." Alden, too, found companionship once more. A shy, skittish rescue dog named Buddy had slowly warmed to him, following him around the shelter with tentative trust. Buddy wasn't Max. He didn't need to be. He was his own soul, and Alden cherished the quiet bond they were building. The shelter became a cornerstone of the town, drawing visitors and volunteers from all over. Eleanor Graves, always a steadfast supporter, spearheaded a town initiative to expand animal welfare programs, inspired by the shelter's success. "We owe this to Max," she said during one of the shelter's anniversary celebrations. "He reminded us of the power of loyalty, love, and second chances." On a crisp autumn day, Alden returned to the forest clearing where Max had led him to the carved marker. Buddy trotted at his side, his tail wagging in the cool breeze. Alden knelt before the marker, placing a fresh flower at its base. The initials of his wife and daughter glinted faintly in the sunlight. For a long while, Alden sat in silence, the weight of his memories both heavy and comforting. Max had been their guardian, not just in life but in spirit, guiding Alden back to the love he thought he'd lost forever. "Thank you, Max," Alden whispered, his voice steady despite the tears slipping down his cheeks. Buddy leaned into him, a warm presence grounding him in the moment. As Alden and Buddy made their way back through the forest, the sunlight filtering through the trees felt like a gentle embrace. Each step carried Alden further from the pain of his past and closer to the hope of his future. The scene faded into a serene view of the forest canopy, the golden light blending seamlessly with the open sky, a symbol of Max's enduring legacy and Alden's new beginning. As Alden and Buddy walked into the golden horizon, we were left with a story that reminds us of the enduring power of love, loyalty, and second chances. Max's unwavering faith in Alden, even when he felt most undeserving, teaches us that healing is always possible when we open our hearts. It also challenges us to reflect. Are there relationships in our lives that need mending? Are we holding back from giving others or ourselves a second chance? This story isn't just about one man and his dog, it's about all of us. Max represents the bonds we sometimes take for granted and the beauty of resilience in the face of adversity. What do you think? Have you ever experienced a moment when an animal or a loved one changed your life in an unexpected way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel so you won't miss the next tale of courage, love, and redemption. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today. Thank you for being a part of our community. Until next time, take care of yourself and those you hold dear.